Good morning. You're watching Senior Notebook on WENY.
Hello, I'm Lori Hansen and welcome to Senior Notebook. Today we have our own hometown trailblazer, Colonel Eileen Collins, United States Air Force retired. So Eileen was the first woman to pilot and also command a space shuttle. She did it 2 times for each, I believe.
Yes.
Once in 1997 and 95 was your pilot.
That's correct.
And then in 1999 and 2005, you commanded the space shuttle. So she has also shared her journey of space shuttle travel in a book, and the book is Through the Glass Ceiling to the Stars. And so thank you for being here today.
Well, thanks, Lori. Thank you for inviting me.
Tell me how a little girl from Elmira, New York, with a big, big dream, how do you get to be an astronaut?
Well, Lori, thanks for the question. I would say, first of all, places like this, so we're at the National Soaring Museum up on Harris Hill. My dad brought me here when I was a child, probably when I was a toddler. And then again, through my elementary school and middle school and high school, we came up here and watched gliders take off. And my dad also took me to the regional airport, the Elmira Corning Regional Airport, and we'd sit on the hood of the car and watch airplanes take off.
Oh.
So I think he sort of set the little bit in my mind, maybe unknowingly. It was cheap entertainment, and it was how we, I would say, maybe spent weekends where we just wanted to kill time and be with the family. And the second thing is my mother. So she took us to the library. And when I was a child, I liked animals and plants and, check out like a big stack of books and take them home. But when I got older, say around middle school, high school, I found the section on aviation. And I started reading books on pilots, women pilots, military pilots. I read books like Fate is the Hunter, The Stars at Noon, which is a book about Jackie Cochran, who started the Women Air Force Service Pilots in World War II. And one of the books I read was God is My Co-Pilot. And so I was really inspired about aviation. And I thought, well, maybe I can be a pilot. But I never told anyone because I thought people would say, oh, you can't do that because you're a girl. And this is back in the 1960s, so people would understand what it was like in the 60s. There were very few women pilots. So I sort of kept it a secret until I was in college, and I signed up for a test program. The United States Air Force started a test program, Women in Flight Training. And I applied to that, and they selected a number of us. I think at that year they selected 10 of us. And we went off to pilot training. So that's kind of maybe a long story of how I got started.
Yeah. So that's very exciting. And how did you do that? Like, you made that decision on your own?
I did. And I would say, first of all, my parents were very supportive of the things that I did. They always said, you can be who you want to be. And I thought, I like to talk about them because parents have a very important role in their kids' life.
Absolutely.
You're not totally responsible for everything your kids do because, they're their own person, but, I think you can introduce them to things that maybe can set the seed. So that's one thing. And the other thing is the women pilots that I read about that, like Bessie Coleman, who was the first African-American woman to get a pilot's license. She was a citizen of the U.S., but she had to go to France to get her license because she couldn't find anyone to teach her to fly in the United States. And I like to use her as an example, and there were many more. I mentioned Jackie Cochran, she ended up being the first woman to go faster than the speed of sound.
Oh, wow.
But because she started the Women Air Force Service Pilots, she became very well known. And I used her life story. She had nothing when she grew up. She was dirt poor, and she grew up in the South. And she was able to, with her energy and her inspiration, become a licensed pilot and then provide like this program that taught 1,000 women how to be military pilots to support World War II. And they never went into combat, but they flew in the United States. And I read book after book about them. So I credit them also for inspiring me to go against maybe traditional careers for women. And I think all of those careers were great. Like when I was a kid, I had a choice of nurse, teacher, office secretary, which is what my mother did, sister, like a nun in the Catholic Church. These were the people that I was exposed to, women for the most part. And those are all great careers, but I thought maybe I don't really know any women pilots personally. I just know the ones I read about. Maybe I can do that.
So those are some great reads. So we'll be right back with some more about Eileen's journey.
Senior Notebook will return in a moment. We now return to Senior Notebook on WENY.
Welcome back. We're sitting here today with Eileen Collins, and we often hear everything happens for a reason. And in the book, you have quite a few of those moments. Can you tell us about some of those moments?
Oh, there's so many. When I wrote the book, I wanted to make it interesting, and I think if you tell stories, you know, that's what people want to hear. So I tell the book, I wrote in the book telling stories. So there's so many to pick from. I'm just gonna, the first one that comes to mind is I was flying a T-38, and we have to go back a couple years. I accidentally got in a thunderstorm in a T-38, and I thought I was gonna die. And I remember just praying to God, please get me out of this, and I promise you I will never again go into a thunderstorm. And I got out of it, but the plane was damaged. There was a hole in the nose, the wings were, I was in a hailstorm, and the wings were dented. And I was responsible for that airplane. It belongs to the United States Air Force, to the taxpayers. And I learned a big lesson from that. So fast forward 10 years. I'm in a T-38 again. This time I'm an astronaut with NASA. And I have a backseater who's also a pilot, but I was the pilot in command. And I'm flying my plane back into Ellington Airport in Houston, and you could see the thunderstorm coming. The sky was dark. I mean, it was a black sky, and it was coming at us, and you could hear the storm was going to hit the field in like a couple minutes. And so I called air traffic control. I need to land immediately. There's a storm coming. You know, I remember what it was like to be in a hailstorm. And they said, negative, take a vector, and they sended me off to the south. And I said, Houston approach, I see the runway. Can I get clearance to the runway? Negative, take this vector. And I said, I'm almost out of gas. I'm going to die if I don't land this airplane. I said that to my backseater. So I switched to the tower, and I said, tower, I am like 3 miles east. I have the runway in sight, request permission to land. And he said yes. And I turned that plane, I put the gear down, put the flaps down, I landed. As soon as I landed, the sky just, down comes the hail. But we were safe. And you know, something like that, we actually had airplanes diverting, but the T-38 has a very small amount of gas. You can only fly for 1 hour. And we have had astronauts in the past run out of gas and have to eject from the airplane.
Oh my goodness.
So, you know, I have learned, the book is full of stories like that, lessons I learned from mistakes that I made, as well as mistakes that other pilots made that we would study to prevent them from happening again. And I think there's so much to be learned in aviation from case studies like that. And even in our own lives, there's so much to be learned from history. And I think it's very important that people read history and try to prevent making the same mistakes over again.
So what life lessons do you want people to take away from the book? For the young kids that are reading it and saying, maybe I can be an astronaut.
Yeah, so I guess there's really a lot of life lessons in there, and the major lesson is on mistakes. So I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, and you don't want your mistakes to overwhelm you and make you quit. So I won't go into them here, but I will tell you that when I was an astronaut, I developed a 4-step process for dealing with mistakes, because I We were always pressed in our job right against the human limit. And as a commander, I'd press my crew up against their limit to force them to make a mistake because I wanted to see how they were going to handle it. So the 4-step process: number 1, recognize and admit you made a mistake. Number 2, fix it. Number 3, put in a procedure to prevent it from happening again to you or someone else. And number 4, move on. And then moving on is, you really need to not forget your mistake, but don't dwell on it, and don't give up because of it. And you'll see that in, for example, athletics. You know, if you're out on the field and you make a mistake and now you're thinking about, no, you got to get back in the game. So that's just one example of a life lesson, and there's many of them.
So your family has been strong supporters of your missions. So many years ago, it's a really quick story. I worked in a bank, and your dad came into the lobby, and you were there with him, and he was so proud of you. And he went down the line, and he introduced you to each one of us. And I remember that, and that was before I knew, what you did. But what does it mean to you that your family was able to experience your dream come true? It's interesting you tell me that story because that's just my dad. He was great. I flew the T-38 into the Elmira Corning Airport back in I don't remember what year it was, but it was a NASA T-38. There was an air show, which is the only reason I could get the airplane in here because NASA would only approve it for an air show. And I had my flight suit, and I got to see some of my high school friends. Well, my mom and dad came out, and they were just like, wow, you're flying that airplane? So it was kind of neat for them to be able to see my job and what I was doing. And I was able to, walk around the plane, show them the cockpit, and, this is what I've been doing for my whole professional life. Wow.
Is, mostly flying this airplane as well as some others.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for doing the interview today. Your story, your journey through the glass ceiling to the stars, it's a really good book if you're interested in learning about her journey. I also kind of want to thank the National Soaring Museum for hosting our interview today. So thank you so much. Have a good day.
Senior Notebook will return in a moment.